Back. Mutt and Jeff, we're just talking about whether or not you can see Tim's hair on the camera. I'm voting that no, you can't.
I have the long flowing locks of Solomon.
Both of them. Welcome back to the podcast. What's going on these days? Hey, welcome back to school. Everybody that has kids in school is going back to school.
Yeah.
Homeschool mamas are getting into the game. What's going on in your world, Tim?
Living the life.
So exciting sounding.
I'm an exciting individual.
Living vicariously through nothing, apparently.
Pretty much.
What's going on in our world? Not a whole lot. Everybody started back to school.
They're not really interested in our day-to-day lives.
They're really not.
Yeah.
We are glad to be here today, though.
Yeah.
We're going to be in 1 Corinthians 12 today. The big spiritual gift chapter. We're going to answer all of the questions you ever had about spiritual gifts today.
Yeah.
If you've ever watched us or listened to us, you know that that's not going to be the case. But I do want to say, though, it's been an interesting study for me going through Corinthians the way we're going through, instead of just like I would say the traditional approach to 1 Corinthians is, here's what you do in the church, here's what you don't do in the church, the rights and the wrongs and all that kind of stuff. And there is some of that, but there's, even in this passage today, there's something bigger that he's addressing. And we're just going to kind of talk through it. I mean, this is not like a formal, here's the exegetical, theological ramifications of the whatever, but because there's layers of truth in Scripture, and I think I've just been kind of pondering over this, that there's layers of truth. There's like what I would call the face value. He's making some assertions about spiritual gifts and what they are. It's not an all-inclusive list. It's not meant to be, though people take it that way. But there's a bigger message in what he's doing in the first part of 1 Corinthians 12 that has really nothing to do with the specific gifts and how they're used and all that. There's really a bigger thing to it. And let's just jump in. He says, now concerning spiritual gifts. And so again, we're going through.
Well, evidently they must have asked questions about it.
Exactly.
So he's gone from
right.
Kind of getting on them a little bit, out of looking like a seeming frustration, to saying, okay, let me talk about some of the things you wrote about. And then over the last chapter we just did, he kind of went back into the beating them up a little bit, so to speak. Now he's gone back into, okay, well, let's talk about these spiritual gifts you asked about.
Well, and to be clear too, we use this term about beating them up, and we say that.
I mean that in a good way.
Yeah,
actually.
I actually think of it in terms of like he's coaching them up. I hate to use coaching
analogies.
Well,
that's what I mean by it, a good way. Yeah.
I hate to use sports analogies anymore because I don't know. They're just tired. But Paul did it, so. It's like when you're trying to get your team to do something in a play or in a game, and there's passion behind that. Maybe they are not running the play right. You're like, come on, guys, no, you know how to do this. We practice this. That's kind of the tone that I get out of a lot of this.
Well, on the flip side of that is you're either willing to be coached or you're not.
Exactly.
Because anybody that's been on any kind of sports can remember the times when you weren't really interested in hearing what the coach had to say, because maybe you thought better or different or whatever, but then there were the times where you were all in.
Right. And
that's what I see in these people.
Well, and I actually, you see maybe both of those things in these people, but
that's what I meant.
And I think primarily what we see is a genuine heart of wanting to do it right. They're pursuing the Lord, they're pursuing the right things. He's frustrated with what they're doing sometimes, but when he says now concerning the spiritual gifts, I think you're right. I think they had asked, obviously, because we know from several chapters back, he said, now let's talk about the things in your letters.
Yeah.
Brothers and sisters, he says, I do not want you to be unaware. I think one translation says ignorant. I don't know what the New American Standard
Unaware.
says. Does it say unaware? And so, well, I'll about to say something, but I'll hold on to it. He says, you know that when you were pagans, you used to be enticed and led astray by mute idols. Now, that really is the functional key verse in setting the context for what he's about to say.
Mhm.
When you were pagans. And so I actually did a little research on the history of the church at Corinth. And I mean, they're coming from a polytheistic background, meaning that they would have had many gods. They would have
Yeah, they had gods for everything you could think
they had
of.
gods for everything.
And the gods, as they carved them and made them, had all kinds of forms.
Yeah,
Creatures, humanistic,
right.
rocks. I mean, they had all kinds.
And it's important to know with what he's about to say about the gifts, he's really not giving a treatise on the particular gifts themselves. There's an assumption made that the gifts are present, the gifts are real, and maybe thirdly that they are manifesting. He's not doing a dissertation on whether or not the gifts are real or there.
Yes.
He's not doing a dissertation on anything other than where the gifts come from. Because he says, remember when you were pagans, you were sucked away into mute idols. You made all these people for you, or these deities for yourself. So then he starts in, therefore, that's an hermeneutics 101. I always teach you, it's so silly, but when you see a therefore, figure out what it's there for. He's making a compare and contrast. Because you used to be polytheistic pagans and you think there are many gods, therefore, I want you to know that no one speaking by the Spirit of God says Jesus is cursed. No one can say Jesus is Lord except by the Holy Spirit. So as I was thinking through this, and Tim, feel free to jump in on this, what he's saying to them is he's making a contrast between what it looks like to follow the Holy Spirit and what it looks like to follow a bunch of other polytheistic stuff. He's saying the Spirit of God is what the Holy Spirit is what he's putting what's the word I'm looking for, the magnifying glass on. Because they're coming at 800 roads lead to Rome. All roads lead to Rome. Polytheism is where they're coming from.
But I don't think I know you.
Because I may not be making clear what I'm thinking.
No, you're making it clear, but what's happening here is as we're speaking of this, we're bringing it back down into how the gifts and that kind of things were. That's what I'm taking out of it. But what he's laying this and saying this very statement because he's using it as a comparison with what the whole book started with.
Fair enough.
You're dealing with Paul and Apollos and all this. You can't bring in the stuff that you've been doing in here. And the reason is because you can't talk. A pagan or an evil spirit will not even make the statement that Jesus is cursed.
Right.
If you hear that,
the other way around.
if you're using or
no one who has the Spirit will say it.
Right.
Yeah.
That and
What's the actual
so
text?
he's using something that is an absolute, the gifts. When I say an absolute, I'm talking about from the kingdom perspective. But he's still laying out, really, almost in the whole chapter. It's what he's done in other ones. He's using conditions that you're talking about and doing. He's still bringing up the thing that you guys are divided on this stuff. And if you're really not really following the Spirit, but if you're really letting the Spirit drive you, these things won't happen. It'll start looking in a different direction.
Right.
Overall, that's what he's talking about here.
Well, and there's a lot of ramifications to that. He says nobody speaking by the Spirit says Jesus is cursed. So if somebody's saying that, that's not something that's coming out of the Spirit. You can dismiss it to some degree. That's not of God. I don't care if you respect them. I don't care how long they've been around. If they're like, no, Jesus isn't it. He's saying No,
Or if they're saying there's another way,
there's another way.
that would
Yeah,
translate the same thing.
exactly. And then the flip side of that is, it says nobody who is listening by the Spirit, or he says the people who are, can say Jesus is Lord except by the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
In other words,
That's an
anything
interesting deal there.
anything you know about the Lord, anything that you think that you're saying about Christ or whatever, is anything that you're saying comes from the Holy Spirit. It's not something that you came up with on your own. In other words.
Yeah. Well, you can't know that without that.
Exactly.
Romans 10 kind of says the same thing.
No, exactly, it does.
So, anyway, keep going.
Well, then he says, now there are different gifts, but the same Spirit. I don't want to be pedantic about it, but I think it's important. He says there are different gifts. That's one of the reasons that we came into this kind of saying he's not here debating whether or not gifts from the Spirit are actually a thing. A lot of people have a lot of these conversations, and we'll talk in the more specific and maybe give some of our opinions and what we can derive from Scripture, and you can take it or leave it. But there are things that are such as gifts of the Spirit. Now, what they look like and all of that can maybe be determined, but the assumption that they were there is, to me, is a fundamental truth that's in the passage that can't be overlooked.
Yeah.
He wasn't there going, well, in some cases, if you're really spiritual, that's not what he was getting at.
Yeah.
He said they just are, but they're of the same Spirit. And that's, to me, the thing that he was really driving home. It's like, you come from a pagan world and you think that these, I want to be careful how I'm about to say this.
Well, I would tell you that he was telling them that their mentality of I am of Paul or I am of Apollos and all these things where they're having these bickering functions, he's telling them that you look like you're still like the pagans out there, because they're watching you and here bicker about, well, my God is this and my God is that, and your God doesn't do it like this and that. Right. That's what they're doing.
Yeah.
And he's
my God doesn't do tongues.
Well, which brings me to a point I wrote down, and I maybe this needs to happen later on in the reading. But from an overall perspective, that happens in the church all the time.
What do you mean? Give me an example.
Well, later on, he's talking about in this chapter, you know, that the way the Spirit works is, and the gifts. The Spirit is the gifts.
Yeah.
So in his view, you can't separate any of that.
Right.
But we're not God. So what strengths you have and what strengths I have could almost look like they're diametrically opposed, not to the Spirit, but I see things a certain way, and so I'm automatically, if I'm a simple mind, I'm going to go, well, that Matt, you know, he talks about doing all this, but he really don't get it. Because all I can see is what I am, right? And so this has to do with all their bickering and separation. Inside of our own church, whether that's corporately or inside the various body, you'll find places where they go, well, you know, and you even insinuate, they don't really get it. But they're either kept people or they're not. And I think that we can discern that by people. And it's not just trying to give them the benefit of the doubt. You got somebody pursuing the Lord, even if they're wrong about everything, at least I think I can. I can tell when they're really genuinely pursuing, even though they might be wrong. So I will allow that. That's a bad way to say it.
Well, you'll give deference to it. You give place.
I will give deference to it. And I would even say, well, yeah, they might be doing some things wrong, but they're real about what they're trying to pursue here. And, you know, maybe that's where when we've talked about this before, and I do believe this, God puts you in a condition when you're trying to pursue him where all you can do is look him in the face. And that's the only way you're going to get past all this stuff. How I tell you to do it has no meaning. With that said, that's what the people are doing in here. And so they're going, well, I'm not like them because they do this. They're not really of the Lord. And we won't believe them because I can only see it like this. So this is how it has to be. So I might stiff arm out there not giving that deference to them, accepting the fact you're my brother.
Yeah.
That's all there is to it. And you're either going to live by believing that, or you're going to stiff arm them because it has to be the way you have it, because you can't, whether that really means you can't get out of that. It has to be that way for you to see it. The point is that's the way you have to see it.
Yeah, that doesn't mean that's the way it is.
I think that's what he's really pouring out here on them, and he's been hammering them on this for the past several chapters.
Yeah. Because what they're saying,
that's how it reads to me.
Well, it does to me too. What they're saying is well, if whichever one of the bigwigs gives us their stamp of approval, well, then that's the way it is. If Paul says that's the way it is, then that's the way it is. If Apollos says that's the way it is, then that's the way it is.
And they're pitting Paul and Apollos to each other, and they're both going,
yeah, neither
what?
one's true. And the whole thing about the spiritual gifts is I think, and I read it like there were lines being drawn, just as we see today.
That's what I'm talking about, even in the church.
Well, we're not a prophesiers, or we're not tongue guys, or we're not this, whatever it is. We don't, and that's where they were starting to have that drawing of the line.
And it is a natural thing to happen, I think, in spiritual growth.
I do too.
But it comes to a place where you have to start dealing with the realities of stuff, or you'll pigeonhole yourself so far off to the side. You're doing the idol thing he's talking about here.
Well,
that's what it looks like.
And it's hard for us, and you said this a while ago, to see variations in strengths, weaknesses, and proportions of gift. We know the scriptures teach us that everybody's given a measure that's particular to them of faith. Yeah. And of gifting, and they're different on purpose. But we have this crazy bend for homogenization. We want everybody to be the same, everybody to look just like us.
If they were really of the Spirit, I would get it.
Exactly.
In all of its depth.
Yeah.
If you did that, you don't need God.
And I think that's part of the point. I mean,
I think that's exactly the point.
Well, it takes me back to even the Tower of Babel. When everybody was the same, there actually was synergistic power.
Yes, there was
in that,
movement,
and that was the problem.
Yes,
it wasn't that they weren't
ready for that.
Yeah, look how great they're doing. Well, they were doing great, and the fact that they were doing great was the issue. Yeah. He said we have to disperse them, or else they're going to succeed at this, but they're going to do it in their own power and not.
And it would destroy them. It's not that they could succeed.
Right.
It's going to mess them up, and they really would be messed up.
Because their success would take them away from their face out of the Father's face.
Exactly. And that's exactly right.
And so in Corinth, we've got these cats, drawing these lines, and he's like, no. It's not that one is good and one is bad. They exist, and they're all of the same Spirit. I've even heard, the fruit of the Spirit, where it goes through love, joy, peace, long suffering. I've heard it taught many times over the years, it's like, and there's some truth in this, so don't dismiss me yet. But it's like, it's not the fruits of, it is the fruit of. Like, it's an all-in-one thing. And that's true.
Yeah.
But then there's a tail end that's taught on that sometimes that makes me go, well, and that is that if you've got one, you've got them all, and they're all the same. Like, if you're deficient in one, then you don't have any of them. I don't believe that that's accurate. I believe you can have lots of long suffering, say, and still, struggle with another one, with whatever it is, with joy or whatever. You can bear with people and have long suffering, but joy is hard to come by, and it's more of a task for you because of the way you're wired. Doesn't mean it's not there, but maybe that's something you have to work harder on to deny your flesh to be able to proceed. Does that make sense?
No, we're hitting all around it. I feel like this is going to really sound stupid.
We'll just say it anyway.
We're trying to convey, because we want people to be able to see. And it's not that we have it all, not by any stretch of the imagination. I find those same emotions in me all the time now, that what I do know, my gifts and what I can do and how that affects. And I've been around long enough that I can actually see some of that. But then the gifts that somebody else has that I don't really understand necessarily, because I don't know how to make them work, really, I guess maybe is a way to say it. So I can be a little stiff arming with them in some condition or another, and if I don't watch my mouth,
Can be dismissive.
inadvertently or something like that, I can dismiss him, and I can even talk bad about him and say, well, that's not really kingdom stuff. I mean, that might not be what I would say, but that's what's coming out. And that's how people would take it. And that's how people will draw sides. Ooh, listen to that mind and that thing, and I'm going to kind of follow that. Or, and anyway, that's what these people are doing in here. And Paul is trying his best. So yes, he's using real things. There are the spirits, or not the spirits. There are the gifts, but the gifts are from the Spirit.
Right.
He is all inclusive. But yet he's doled out different things, and it takes all of us to be able to see these things. Just like Romans says that everything created screams God. A tree in itself screams God. The grass blowing in the wind screams God. The wind blowing that you hear screams God. They're individual things, but the totality of it,
Yeah.
you can awe yourself in nature and see those kinds of things. And I'm kind of one of those guys. I'm saying that because I've been educated in it. I'm not one that looks out and goes, that's beautiful. That's not how I was made. Doesn't mean I'm missing the point. But I'm saying this as an example of I had to learn how to see that. And it's not natural to me, so I take like you, or I take my wife or somebody like that, and when they go, oh, I want to sit back and go, I want to see that. But there's other things I can see where I have that same response, and y'all go, okay. Does that make sense?
Kind of. Well, and part of it too is like, you see a tree, and it's magnificent, but that doesn't diminish the ants. They're
Right.
just
No,
different.
right.
They're all part of the same deal. And I think part of the central thing of what he's saying, when he says there are different, where we go back to verse 5, he says there are different ministries, but the same Lord. There are different activities, but the same God produces each gift in each person. A manifestation of the Spirit is given to each person for the common good.
And the manifestation is kind of the key word there, I think.
Yeah.
That means that, well, what that means and what he's talking about in comment here is that how they respond and act, particularly if they're pursuing the things of the kingdom in a genuine sense, God is manifesting himself and who he is and what that is through them, no matter where they are in the spectrum of travel of that.
Right. Well, and it part of the message that he's trying to, I think, get through to the Corinthians that I like here is it's like, guys, we're all on the same team, and B, it takes all of us.
Yeah.
It's designed that way. When I was playing basketball back in the day, one of the worst things you can do in a competitive game is have somebody foul out and not have somebody else to come back. I mean, if you're going to go 5-on-4, whoever's got 4 is fixing to get pummeled. Because it takes every person to make the machine work.
Yeah.
You know, I was watching you do leadership school or pictures of one time when, you know, the guys carrying the logs and stuff. I mean, you get 6 guys on a big heavy log versus 3, it's a different ball game.
Yeah.
And part of what he's saying is like, you're all going to have differences. There's going to be different stuff going on, but it's all coming from the same place.
And you have to learn to see it that way if you can't see it naturally. That's kind of where he's getting at.
And it's an act of discipline. It is
all that comes into the.
Yeah.
I agree with that.
What else does he say? He says, well, and let me touch on this before we move on. The fact that he says every person is given a gift, a manifestation of the Spirit to each person. It's really easy, especially in our culture, for people to start thinking, well, that doesn't mean me. I don't really have anything to offer. That's kind of, I hear that, you know, who am I? He's like, no, everybody is important. Everybody and whatever gift. And I would even go to the point of when the church global starts saying, okay, what's your spiritual gift? If you're out there and watching or listening, raise your hand. If you've ever taken one of those spiritual gift inventories.
Kind of thinking that too.
Huh? You were thinking about that too?
Keep going.
Okay. And they're not bad, they're great, they're fine. But they're very limited. And it'll give you, okay, well, you have to have one of these gifts that we're talking about, because where'd you get those? Well, we got them out of the scripture. Oh, okay. But what I've never seen is on one of those deals is bricklaying, woodworking, or masonry. And if you go into the Old Testament,
Oh yeah.
the scriptures say that God supernaturally gifted masons, artisans, goldsmiths, blacksmiths. It goes down this list for building the temple. It wasn't just that they were good at it. They were
They
supernaturally.
weren't laborers. They were craftsmen.
They were craftsmen. But they weren't just craftsmen because they practiced. They were craftsmen because God supernaturally gifted them to do it.
Yes.
And so the thing that I tend to want to do,
But that's only for that.
No, it's not. It's okay. Tim's playing devil's advocate here, and he's like, the argument is like that was Old Testament. That's not.
It was
here
those
anymore.
20 people, and that was it. It's the only time it's ever happened.
But what we try to do on this deal is let's see how God deals with his creation. Let's
Yeah.
see how he sees it.
Yes, that's the
If
way to
he
look at it.
wants or need, I'm going to use the word need, but it's really wants and desires something to take place, he will gift his people to perform and accomplish that which he wants to take place. And he's been doing it all through time.
Yes.
And so because we approach 1 Corinthians with this concept of give me my check boxes, give me my rules, we miss the fact that what Paul's saying here is, look, this is how the Spirit of God works in you.
Yes.
This is what I need you to step back and see. You're all different. You've all got these different gifts, and it's this one and that one and that one and this one and different. And here's the other thing. Everybody's like, well, 1 Corinthians 12 tells us what we do and we don't have. But he says, look at the language he's using. There are different ministries. How much more vague could he be? What does that mean?
No, we have to be able to say a ministry is this if it's really of the kingdom. Well, and the guy that's laying the bricks over here that's actually naturally superimposed with it, I'll use the word superimposed, but let's just say he's naturally gifted, and he does it well. That's doing the same thing as someone who may be doing a recognized gift per se, at least from a kingdom point of view.
Well, and we've gotten ourselves pigeonholed into this idea that some gifts are, that gifts of the Spirit are all spiritual.
Well,
and that they're not, and that they don't have a physical, I'm going to use the word carnal or fleshly, but I don't mean it in a bad way, practical application. Does that make sense?
well, and I may make a lot of people mad here, and I don't really intend to do that, but
I'll try to say
if you're, well, you can, sometimes I just see it in black and white. If you're a leader or a mentor of some type in the organized Christian church, I don't mean necessarily have a title of elder or something. I'm just talking about you've been around long enough, kind of like we have. And you bring out a spiritual gift, what'd you call them? The test?
Oh, the inventory.
Inventory, yeah. So you bring one of those out, and you're one of those, well, you got to have that spiritual gift. We got to find out what your spiritual gift is. So if you do that thing, and you find out your spiritual gift because Matt told you that's what your spiritual gift was, and he may be right to some extent or another. Here's my point, is that that's between you and God, I think. I might be able to look at somebody and kind of see maybe what they have, what they don't have. Doesn't mean not to pursue them. But what it does mean, it falls back into that working out your salvation with fear and trembling. You really want to know what your spiritual gift is? Live life staring God in the face and learning what that kingdom is. And over time, that will start to manifest itself for what it really is. If you're trying to put the other one, you're putting the cart before the horse, and you're doing like Abraham and Sarah did.
Yeah.
You're going to be the father of many nations, and your son's going to have it. Well, what'd they do? They went out and got Hagar so that they could have a son.
Yeah. Because they couldn't see how God was going to do it with their current circumstances.
And that is the man who is entitled with the title, the man of faith.
The man who believed God.
Yeah.
Well, and the way that I've had this conversation with people before. How do you determine your own spiritual gift or someone else's? Well, my very first response is why do you have to determine it?
Yeah, that's a good
You know,
response.
why? Just get in God's face, get on your face before him, ask him to fill you, and then just go out and live. And
Because those statements that we're making are not as clear cut of here's a list of gifts.
pick
Let's
one.
find out which one you fall into.
Yeah.
If you're doing that, you're limiting the kingdom on your own power by doing that.
Well,
Doesn't mean it's not your. I still think that if you're pursuing God, even if you're doing that, eventually it's going to start showing itself, and He may understand it, or somebody else will catch it, or whatever that is. But whatever is naturally pursuing in the kingdom, like people in the church that are actually serving and checking on people and doing all that stuff, you know what that guy is?
a deacon. Whether he carries a title or not, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, that's what you're naturally pursuing.
Well, and people are going to be like, I know people who are. We used to have a pastor in Iowa. He was gifted at doing hospital ministry.
Yeah.
It was just his thing. He won more people to the Lord in the hospital than most people ever did, pastors ever did in the church.
Yeah.
It was just his thing. He was uniquely wired for some way and gifted. He was good in the hospital. He was terrible at funerals.
Yeah.
It was awful. And it just, for whatever reason, it just, I don't know why, just what, but I've seen guys who could give a funeral, message or whatever that was just out of this world. But man, they're just, and so it's little things like that. And what I tell people is, what is it? Is that if it's really wound you up and you're like, I got to figure it out. First, I would encourage you, don't have to figure it out. Just go live the kingdom. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. We can stare for God in the face and just live the way and listen for the Spirit. But it's like, if you just got to get something, get your teeth into something. I always ask people, what is it that when you're doing it, whatever it is you're doing, you feel alive, you feel close to the Lord, His Spirit's bearing witness with your spirit, you feel worshipful. What are those things?
Yeah.
And it might be, I had a lady in my church in West Texas, or Central Texas, when I was in my early 20s. Her thing, her big thing, she went to the nursing home every Thursday or whatever it was, and she cut people's toenails that couldn't cut them. I would be, I would just be like, no, can't do it. And I'm just not, it not only was it like, okay, I'm able to do it, they can't. It made her feel so close to the Lord. It was her thing. And I don't see cutting toenails in the list.
That's not a spiritual gift, Matt.
Well, but, and the argument with that would be like, well, she has the gift of service.
You know I'm being facetious.
I know
right?
you are. And, somebody would say, well, she has the gift of service. And my encouragement would be, maybe we don't need to be so ready to just put a label on it.
Yeah.
And here's part of the reason why. You hear us talk all the time about, it's not about a formula. Okay, because as soon as we just feel this compulsion to put a label, we got to identify it. We got to figure out what it is. Well, so that we can put it in a list, so that we can put it on an inventory, and so on and so on. And now we get this, if you'll just do this and do these 5 things, you're going to be good. Here's your gift. But what if your gift changes?
Well, now you're starting to meddle.
Okay, well, let's meddle. I don't know anybody out here, maybe listening, or anybody that I've ever known that's walked with the Lord very long at all, that they haven't changed.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the point. Sanctification is all about being transformed into the image of Christ.
Yeah.
And so there have been seasons in my life where I know that He's gifted me in certain ways to deal with certain things. At other parts of my life, I didn't need to do that. And so maybe I'm not saying He takes the gifts away, but He could.
Well, so a lot of these things that Paul mentions, especially I think maybe in 13. First there's an apostle, second there's this. Well, we automatically make a rank structure out of that.
Yeah.
I don't think he's really listing them that way.
Well, in Ephesians 4, he gave gifts to the church.
But maybe he is. But he actually looked like he had a lot of those same capacities, healing, he did healings and stuff, right? And I mean, you can run all over the place with that. Well, if you're really with God, then you got them all. And all he's talking about is who are you really, is how I would say it.
Yeah.
Well, I have my spiritual side, and and then there's the what do they call it?
The
in
world.
the spirit and in the
Flesh.
flesh. Well, Paul's not looking at it like that. That's who you really are. And then I would say, well, I don't know what my spiritual gift is. How am I supposed to do it? Or like you said, well, I have nothing to offer. Well, that starts getting into spiritual laziness. Go do some stuff. Go on a mission trip. I don't know, try to do a sermon somewhere or something. There's nothing wrong with any of that. Well, it's not what I'm supposed to be doing. Well, no, you're out there building and finding out who you are and what it is. That's legal, so to speak.
I guess I was going to say, can I chase a quick rabbit? It's our podcast, so I guess I can.
You can do as you please, brother.
As a pastor in the church for coming on 30 years, 29 this month, when I surrendered to the ministry,
let
me just tell you how that went. I went down at a church service at the end of the service, and the Lord was dealing with me in general about, I want all of you.
Yeah.
And so I went down like you do at the end of the church service in an altar call. And I just told the Lord, I was like, I don't know what I'm saying and what this means, but whatever you want me to do, I will do it. I give you everything. My marriage, it was brand new. She was expecting a baby. Everything I've got is yours. You just do with me whatever you want to do. And I meant every word of it.
Yeah.
So the pastor comes down and says, hi, Matt, I see you come down today. What are you praying? What can I pray with you about? And I just said, I'm just surrendering my life to the Lord, whatever he wants me to do. Okay, that's great. At the end of the church service, he stands me up in front of the congregation and says, church, here's Matt Parker, and I'm going to ask his wife to come down. And she comes down and stands with me and holding my hand and said, Matt is surrendered into full-time ministry.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, man. Yeah.
And she squeezed my hand so hard, I thought she was going to bring blood. Just because I'm like, I didn't tell her that.
I didn't say that.
She's like, I didn't sign up for that. Well, I didn't either. Now, does it turn out that that's what God had led me into? It did. I'm not saying the guy was wrong.
Yeah.
But, well, he was wrong. I very rarely in 29 years have been in full-time, in terms of what he meant full-time, making my living from the church. But I was not surrendering to the ministry.
Yeah.
About 8 months later, 6 or 7 months later, I was pastoring my first church because that's what he said I was supposed to do. I was given two paths. You either go into the ministry as a pastor or you get to be a missionary. Yeah. And I've since then go, no. So when somebody comes down and says, I just want to give my heart to the Lord, I'm going to go to seminary. Maybe you should, maybe you shouldn't. Maybe you need to go get really good at business. Or there's a million things you could talk about at that point in time. Let's talk about how God's wired you and what you're gifted for. And that sort of thing. And I think that's part of what Paul's saying here.
Well, that's exactly what he's saying there. You people are doing this because they asked about gifts, right? But they asked about other things too. And so he's using pieces of what was going on in there to say, well, this is what you're doing.
Yeah.
But that's not what that is. The gifts that I'm telling you are not things that one is above another, or it's going to draw lines in your church to where you're dealing with one another, much less the pagans out there, because the way y'all are bickering over this thing, it looks like you're having the same conversations they're having out there in the circle about with all their gods.
They really are. And I think that's one of the interesting things. I mean, I've had people tell me before, I don't want to go to church because y'all don't get along any better than we do. Yeah. The divorce rate in the church is actually worse than it is out in the wild, as it were.
I would believe
that. And so we can't come to the table with things like that. And he's just like, in the tone of this, he was like, y'all are missing it.
Yeah.
I'm going to finish up this passage and then we got to land the plane. But he says, the manifestation of the Spirit's given to each person for the common good. I could talk about that for 30 minutes. To one is given a message of wisdom through the Spirit, to another a message of knowledge by the same Spirit, to another faith by the same Spirit, to another gifts of healing by one Spirit, to another the performing of miracles, to another prophecy, to another distinguishing between spirits, to another different kinds of tongues, to another interpretation of tongues. But here, so he goes through this, and it's not an all-inclusive list. He's just like, these are the things that you're seeing in your body. But here's the crux of this section. One and the same Spirit is active in all these, distributing to each person as he wills. So part of that for me is, don't get cranky if you don't have the same gift somebody else does. And
well, it may be a little nuanced, but so in that list that he had out there, if you have an NIV Bible, you're not going to see it. But when he says of the Spirit, this Spirit, and of the Spirit of this, or the Spirit of that, it's all capital S.
Yeah.
And then in this verse right here, where it ends in verse 11, it says distributing to each one individually just as he wills. And that's a capital H.
Yeah.
So it's all the same God. That's the reason I bring that up.
Right.
Because it's easy to say, well, it's a spirit of this and a spirit of that. You start splitting them up thinking they're all completely different things from somewhere else.
Well, and our whole focus is always kingdom vision. How does the kingdom see things? He's saying you're focused on healing. You're focusing on the trees, and you're missing the forest. And the forest is, you know what? God gives according to his will the things. You get what you get.
Yeah.
And that goes for circumstances. It goes for gifts. It goes with money, jobs. Brother Green used to always say, he said, I have as much money as God can trust me with, and he must not trust me very much. That's what Brother Green used to always say.
Well, I can identify with that.
You know, and so part of the message in it is, for me, it's not just, oh, I know that there's gifts of healings, because in 1 Corinthians chapter 12, he says there are gifts of healings by the Spirit. He's making those assumptions.
Yeah.
Those are predisposed facts. The point of the first half of 1 Corinthians 12 is like, quit focusing on who's got what. Focus on the fact that the Spirit is doing stuff and gifting everybody for the common good of the body.
But the basis of what they were doing, I read somewhere this experiment, and I actually did it one time when I was in CAP. Took like 5 kids up, and I say, okay, you're a lawyer, you're a doctor, you're a school teacher, you're a janitor, and you're a truck driver. Y'all line up in the order of who you think is first to last. And it darn near started a fight. That's what these people are doing, and that's why Paul has the tone that he has on top of them. You guys think you manipulate these things and can make them how it is that you so choose to do. And what you're missing is that the Lord has made you the way you are and what you do and where you're at. Specifically, if you're, I would even tell you before you're saved, that's there. Don't really know how all that works, but specifically after you're saved and you're in here doing this stuff, you guys are sitting around. That's why the Paul and Apollos and all that kind of stuff. You're jockeying for some kind of stupid position, and you're completely missing the point of the whole thing.
Well, you're jockeying for a position that doesn't even exist.
In the real world, which is the kingdom.
It doesn't
exist. That's exactly right.
There's only one position, him and us. That's it.
All the conversations that we've read so far, and some of the ones we're fixing to read, it's Paul doing the face palm.
Come on, guys. It's not about that. And if you really want to go back and read through up to this point, you'll, with this lens on, you can see him over and over going, it's not about that, guys. It's not about that, guys.
Yeah.
It's not about that. And over again in his tone. We're gonna keep plowing through 1 Corinthians. We'll hopefully get to see you. Had more than usual people watching today, and I'm glad to hear that. Don't forget to go out, and I think Sean's going to put a little blip on there to go download our app in both the App Store and in Google Play. If you need to get in touch with us, you can do it through there. You can even donate through the ministry through there. I'm going to shout out Lauren Waycaser because she commented. That means I can comment on somebody watching.
Way to go, Lauren.
She says, great topic today. Lots of questions. And she says you touched on most of them. Oh, Lauren, hey, send me an email or something. with your questions, and we'll just tackle them. We'll just talk about them online, or if you really got brave, you could come on the show. And we'd love for you to come visit with us, Lauren. I'm just saying. Love to hear your questions and let us talk about them in real time.
I want you to come on the show.
Yeah, that'd be great. I don't have anything special going on. Y'all just continue to pray for our family if you don't mind. And got lots of stuff in the air going on there. Everybody's starting back to school. But guys, y'all keep studying, keep learning, keep doing the deal.
See you next week.
Share the podcast. See you later.